evening, and welcome to another edition of What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse. This furry shag carpet remnant is Oliver, and today is Thursday, May 12th, and just a short greetings to my father, whose birthday was May 10th, this past Tuesday. This year he would have been 95. He passed away in 2020, so he was 93. And he shared the longevity that my grandparents had, and seems to be something that's in the genes of your particular family. But anyway, he had a long life. He was a good father, and much respect, much love for my father. Wayne Alfred Morse, he had a nickname where he worked at a shipyard. His nickname was Whammo. And Alex, if you're listening, you've got a bag of cookies in here for later. Carla was baking this afternoon. Anyway, we have been reading and discussing segments from George Orwell's 1949 book called 1984. This is our fourth reading from the book. We're going in sequence. And the main protagonist, if you're not familiar with the story, is Winston Smith. He's about 39 years old. He lives in London, which is, in this story, the capital of Oceania, which is one of three regimes that control the majority of the population in the world, and this is in the future date 1984. Winston Smith works for the Ministry of Truth. His job, hi Bryce, his job is to go through records and change them to fit the narrative of the regime. In other words, if someone needs to be taken out of the picture, so to speak, public figure, a party member for transgressions or for committing some crime, then that person's history is erased and all references to that person are erased. It's as if the person never existed. Somewhat like cancer. That was a Freudian slip. The cancel culture that we are living through now, whereby for about a year's time we were erasing people by taking down their statues and taking their names out of history books. So kind of a parallel course if you think about it. Only Winston's job is to go through history books, newspaper accounts, magazines accounts, public records, and erase any mention or reference to people who have fallen out of favor with the party. So there are people who are not party members. They are called the proletariat or proles. And 85% of the people in Orwell's 1984 are proles. And they live rather dull, impoverished lives, providing the muscle needed to participate in wars and participating in manufacturing, the military-industrial complex that feeds these wars. So in one of these proletariat neighborhoods of London, Winston comes across a curiosity shop, Dickens' curiosity shop, and there's objects, some is junk, some are antiques, and he comes across a notebook, and he buys the notebook, and he starts later on writing a diary. And in the diary, he writes what he cannot say, what he cannot write in public, certainly what he can't write at work, and stuff that if he mentions or says these aloud in his sleep, the telescreen, which is like Alexa, will hear you And if Alexa hears you or the telescreen hears you, then you know that authorities monitoring what's going on with the population, the security services, are going to hear and take note as well. So, where we're picking up is he has just put his notebook down, his diary down, and something unexpected happens. He's in his home. Let's see. He sat back in his chair, slightly ashamed of himself for writing in the diary, and laid down the pen. The next moment, he started violently. There was a knocking at the door. Already, he sat up as still as a mouse in the futile hope that whoever it was might go away after a single attempt. But no, the knocking was repeated. The worst thing of all would be to delay. His heart was thumping like a drum, but his face, from long habit, was probably expressionless. He got up and moved heavily toward the door. As he put his hand on the doorknob, Winston saw that he had left the diary open on the table. "Down with Big Brother" was written all over it, in letters almost big enough to be legible across the room. It was an inconceivably stupid thing to have done. But he realized, even in his panic, he had not wanted to smudge the creamy paper by shutting the book while the ink was wet. He drew in his breath and opened the door. Instantly, a warm wave of relief flowed through him. A colorless, crushed-looking woman with wispy hair and a lined face was standing outside. "Oh, comrade," she began in a dreary, whiny sort of voice, "I thought I heard you come in. Do you think you could come across and have a look at our kitchen sink? It's got blocked up again." It was Mrs. Parsons, the wife of a neighbor on the same floor. Mrs. was a word somewhat discontinued by the party. You were supposed to call everyone comrade. But with some women, one used Mrs. instinctively. She was a woman of about 30, but looking much older. One had the impression that there was dust in the creases on her face. Winston followed her down the passageway. These amateur repair jobs were an almost daily irritation. Victory Mansion apartments were old flats built in 1930 or thereabouts and were falling to pieces. The plaster flaked constantly from the ceilings and the walls. Pipes burst in every hard frost. The roof leaked whenever there was snow. The heating system was usually running at half steam when it was not closed down altogether for motives of economy. Repairs, except what you could do for yourself, had to be sanctioned by remote committees who were liable to hold up even the mending of a window pane for 2 years. "Of course it's only because Tom isn't home," said Mrs. Parsons vaguely. The Parsons flat was bigger than Winston's, and dingy in a different way. Everything had a battered, trampled-on look, as though the place had just been visited by a large, violent animal. Games, hockey sticks, boxing gloves, a burst football, a pair of sweaty shorts turned inside out, lay all over the floor, and on the table there was a litter of dirty dishes and dog-eared exercise books. On the walls were scarlet banners of the Youth League and the Spies, and a full-size portrait or poster of Big Brother. There was the usual boiled cabbage smell, common to the whole building, but it was shot through by a sharper reek of sweat, which, one knew this at the first sniff, though it was hard to say how, was the sweat of some person not present at the moment. In another room, someone with a comb and a piece of toilet paper was trying to keep tune with the military music which was still issuing from the telescreen. "It's the children," said Mrs. Parsons, casting a half-apprehensive glance at the door. "They haven't been out today. And, of course," she had a habit of breaking off her sentences in the middle. The kitchen sink was full nearly to the brim with filthy greenish water, which smelt worse than even the cabbage. Winston knelt down and examined the angle joint of the pipe. He hated using his hands, and he hated bending down, which was always liable to start him coughing. Mrs. Parsons looked on helplessly. "Of course, if Tom was home, he'd put it right in a moment," she said. "He loves anything like that. He's ever so good with his hands, Tom is." Parsons was Winston's fellow employee at the Ministry of Truth. He was a fattish but active man of paralyzing stupidity, a mass of imbecile enthusiasms, one of those completely unquestioning, devoted drudges on whom, more even than on the thought police, the stability of the party depended. At 35, he had just been unwillingly evicted from the Youth League, and before graduating into the Youth League, he had managed to stay on in the spies for a year beyond the statutory age. At the ministry, he was employed in some subordinate post for which intelligence was not required. But on the other hand, he was a leading figure on the sports committee and all the other committees engaged in organizing community hikes, spontaneous demonstrations, savings campaigns, and voluntary activities generally. He would inform you with quiet pride between whiffs of his pipe that he had put in an appearance at the community center every evening for the past 4 years. An overpowering smell of sweat, a sort of unconscious testimony to the strenuousness of his life, followed him about wherever he went, and even remained behind him after he had gone. "Have you got a wrench?" said Winston, fiddling with the nut on the angle joint. "A wrench," said Mrs. Parsons, immediately becoming invertebrate. "I don't know. I'm sure. Perhaps the children." There was a trampling of boots and another blast on the comb as the children charged into the living room. Mrs. Parsons brought the wrench. Winston let out the water and disgustedly removed the clot of human hair that had blocked up the pipe. He cleaned his fingers as best he could in the cold water from the tap and went back into the other room. "Up with your hands," yelled a savage voice. A handsome, tough-looking boy of 9 had popped up from behind the table and was menacing him with a toy automatic pistol, while his sister, about 2 years younger, made the same gesture with a fragment of wood. Both of them were dressed in the blue shorts, gray shirts, and red neckerchiefs, which were the uniform of the spies. Winston raised his hands above his head, but with an uneasy feeling. So vicious was the boy's demeanor that it was not altogether a game. "You're a traitor," yelled the boy. "You're a thought criminal. You're a Eurasian spy." Eurasia was one of the other 3 regimes controlling the world. "I'll shoot you. I'll vaporize you. I'll send you to the salt mines." Suddenly they were both leaping around him, shouting, "Traitor! Thought criminal!" the little girl imitating her brother in every movement. It was somehow slightly frightening, like the gamboling of tiger cubs which will soon grow up to be man-eaters. There was a sort of calculating ferocity in the boy's eyes, a quiet, evident desire to hit or kick Winston, and a consciousness of being very nearly big enough to do so. It was a good job. It was not a real pistol he was holding, Winston thought. It was a good thing. Mrs. Parsons' eyes flitted nervously from Winston to the children and back again. In the better light of the living room, he noticed with interest that there actually was dust in the creases of her face. "They do get so noisy," she said. "They're disappointed because they couldn't go to see the hanging. That's what it is. I'm too busy to take them, and Tom won't be back from work in time." "Why can't we go and see the hanging?" roared the boy in his huge voice. "Want to see the hanging, want to see the hanging," chanted the little girl, still capering about. Some Eurasian prisoners, guilty of war crimes, were to be hanged in the park that evening, Winston remembered. This happened about once a month and was a popular spectacle. Children always clamored to be taken to see it. He took his leave of Mrs. Parsons and made for the door. But he had not gone 6 steps down the passage when something hit him on the back of his neck, an agonizing blow from behind. It was as though a red-hot wire had been jabbed into him. Winston spun around just in time to see Mrs. Parsons dragging her son back into the doorway while the boy pocketed a slingshot. Okay. "Goldstein," bellowed the boy as the door closed on him. Goldstein was like a target of wrath. He was a traitor that the regime used to stir up hatred towards something else other than the regime. Goldstein bellowed, the boy as the door closed on him. But what most struck Winston was the look of helpless fright on the woman's grayish face. Back in the flat, he stepped quickly past the telescreen and sat down at the table again, still rubbing his neck. The music from the telescreen had stopped. Instead, a clipped military voice was reading out with a sort of brutal relish a description of the armaments of the new floating fortresses, which had just been anchored between Iceland and the Faroe Islands, north of Scotland. With those children, he thought, that wretched woman must lead a life of terror. Another year, 2 years, and they would be watching her day and night for symptoms of irregularity. Nearly all children nowadays were horrible. What was worst of all was that by means of such organizations as the spies, they were systematically turned into ungovernable little savages, and yet this produced in them no tendency whatsoever to rebel against the discipline of the party. On the contrary, they adored the party and everything connected with it. The songs, the processions, the banners, the hiking, the drilling with dummy rifles, the yelling of slogans, the worship of Big Brother. It was all sort of a glorious game to them. All their ferocity was turned outwards, against the enemies of the state, against foreigners, traitors, saboteurs, thought criminals. It was almost normal for people over 30 to be frightened of their own children. And with good reason, for hardly a week passed in which the Times newspaper did not carry a paragraph describing how some eavesdropping little sneak, A child hero was the phrase normally used, had overheard some compromising remark and denounced his parents to the thought police. The sting of the catapult bullet had worn off. Winston picked up his pen half-heartedly, wondering whether he could find something more to write in his diary. Suddenly, he began thinking of O'Brien again. Years ago, how long was it? 7 years it must have been. He had dreamed that he was walking through a pitch-dark room, and someone was sitting to one side of him and had said, "We shall never meet in the place, we shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." It was said very quietly, almost casually, a statement, not a command. He had walked on without pausing. What was curious was that at the time, in the dream, the words had not made much impression on him. It was only later and by degrees that they had seemed to take on meaning. He could not now remember whether it was before or after having the dream that he had seen O'Brien for the first time. Nor could he remember what he had first identified as the voice of O'Brien's. But at any rate, the identification existed. It was O'Brien who had spoken to him in the dream out of the dark. Winston had never been able to feel sure. Even after this morning's flash of the eyes, it was still impossible to be sure whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy. Nor did it even seem to matter greatly. There was a link of understanding between them, more important than affection or partisanship, actually. "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," he had said. Winston did not know what it meant, only that in some way or another it would come true. A voice from the telescreen, the voice from the telescreen paused. A trumpet call, clear and beautiful, floated into the stagnant air. The voice continued raspingly. "Attention, your attention, please. A news flash has this moment arrived from the Malabar front. Our forces in South India have won a glorious victory. I am authorized to say that the action we are now reporting may well bring the war within measurable distance of its end. Here is the news flash." Bad news coming, thought Winston. And sure enough, following on a gory description of the annihilation of a Eurasian army with stupendous figures of killed and prisoners, came the announcement that, as from next week, the chocolate ration would be reduced from 30 grams to 20. Now, 20 grams would be, I'm going to say, half the size of a Kit Kat bar. Winston belched again. The gin was wearing off, leaving a deflated feeling. The telescreen, perhaps to celebrate the victory, perhaps to drown the memory of the lost chocolate, crashed into "Oceania, 'tis for thee." You were supposed to stand to attention. However, in his present position, at his desk around the corner, he was invisible. "Oceania, 'tis for thee" gave way to lighter music. Winston walked over to the window, keeping his back to the telescreen. The day was still cold and clear. Somewhere far away, a rocket bomb exploded with a dull, reverberating roar. About 20 or 30 of them a week were falling on London at present, and normally they fell on proletariat neighborhoods. Down in the street, the wind flapped the torn poster to and fro, and the word "INSOC" fitfully appeared and vanished. INSOC, the sacred principles of INSOC. Newspeak, doublethink, the mutability of the past. He felt as though he were wandering in the forests of the sea bottom, lost in a monstrous world where he himself was the monster. He was alone. The past was dead. The future was unimaginable. What certainty had he that a single human creature now living was on his side? And what way of knowing that the dominion of the party would not endure forever? Like an answer, the three slogans on the white face of the Ministry of Truth came back to him. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. He took a 25-cent piece out of his pocket. There, too, in tiny clear lettering, the same slogans were inscribed, and on the other face of the coin, the head of Big Brother. Even from the coin, the eyes pursued you. On coins, on stamps, on the covers of books, on banners, on posters, on the wrappings of a cigarette package, everywhere. Always the eyes watching you and the voice enveloping you. Asleep or awake, working or eating, indoors or outdoors, in the bath or in bed, there was no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. The sun had shifted round, and the myriad windows of the Ministry of Truth, with the light no longer shining on them, looked grim as the loopholes of a fortress. His heart quailed before the enormous pyramid shape. It was too strong. It could not be stormed. 1,000 rocket bombs would not batter it down. He wondered again for whom he was writing this diary. For the future? For the past? For an age that might be imaginary? And in front of him there lay no death but annihilation. The diary would be reduced to ashes and himself to vapor. Only the thought police would read what he had written before they wiped it out of existence, wiped it out of memory. How could you make appeal to the future when not a trace of you, not even an anonymous word scribbled on a piece of paper, could physically survive? The telescreen struck 14. He must leave in 10 minutes. He had to be back at work by 14:30. So I think we'll stop there. And when we come back, we're going to move a little further forward. And there's an interesting exchange that Winston has in back at the Ministry of Truth during lunch hour with Symes, whose job it is well, I'll tell you what Symes' job is. But let's see. Winston's... Wow. All right, anyway. Just a second. Because we're obviously not going to go through the whole book. But... All right. I think we'll go to Comrade Ogilvy. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Okay, very good. So we'll pick up again on this, and I hope you've found this interesting. Again, any parallels between this fiction and what some places on Earth are experiencing right now is up to you. So Oliver and I say goodbye. Yes, Oliver, we're saying goodbye. And we wish you a good weekend. And we'll be back next Thursday at 5:45, and we'll continue another section of 1984 with a brief discussion. Take care, and God bless. Cheers.